And yes, one day it's gonna happen. I will definitely invite him to my channel as well. But before I do that, I simply need a good topic that we could talk about. Hello and welcome to another Murdock Music Minute. This time not alone on the couch, but with a dear guest. I have announced him before. Welcome to the couch of torture, maybe.
Thank you, Murdock. It's nice to be here.
Stefan
nice.
Redelsteiner from Stefan Redelsteiner Experience.
Yes.
We've made 2 videos together already on his channel discussing Britpop, or rather Oasis, Blur and Pulp. And this time we've met up on my channel for some quite different topic. We're talking prog rock today.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, maybe all its pros and cons, or yeah. The question is prog or flop. For some people, prog equals flop automatically. Yeah, to maybe give you a bit of context. So I am the one who listens to probably more to prog rock than you are.
Yeah.
You are not really the biggest fan, or you don't know too much of prog rock, or how would you describe your
I don't know much
prog knowledge?
I don't know much about prog rock because, to be honest, because I don't like it. It's a genre of music that that's really kind of the opposite of what I'm looking for in rock or pop music. So it was very interesting for me. You gave me like a homework to listen to 3 albums.
Yeah.
2 of those I wasn't familiar with. So it's always interesting to to spend time with things that you don't like. That can be an interesting lesson for a human being to grow as a human being.
So that's why I'm looking forward to this discussion. So between the two of us, I'm probably not the prog expert. I wouldn't also consider myself a diehard prog fan. I like quite a lot of progressive rock. I also frequently listen to progressive rock, but I also have to say it's not a genre that is closest to my heart, or I don't listen to progressive rock all the time. Also, I more or less exclusively listen to what people would probably consider classic progressive rock. So we are talking about
no Dream Theater.
We're talking about the 70s here. I don't know a lot about the so-called neo-prog movement from the 80s, and I'm really not into progressive metal or the new progressive. Yeah, you mentioned Dream Theater. It's it's not something I listen to.
Another thing, so that you know where I'm coming from, I always thought I should like prog. I said I don't like prog, and it's the opposite in what I'm looking for in pop music. But on some level, I should like it because I like fantasy movies, for example, and fantasy books, and I like all the things that the typical prog nerd would like. Can't think of anything else, but there's many aspects. Maybe we'll get into this when in the video that I should like, and maybe some of those things I liked about the 3 albums we're going to talk about. Other things maybe I still
Let's
don't
find
like.
out. You've already mentioned a few aspects, or maybe even cliches, that people have in mind when they hear the term prog rock. It's usually fantasy lyrics, all a bit pompous, mystical themes. So let's find out whether the 3 albums that we decided to discuss today really fulfill those cliches, or something I would like to look into also is the question, is this prog or isn't this prog? Judging also from discussions on other YouTube channels, or also in pop and rock literature, apparently since the beginning of prog rock, a big question from critics, from listeners, from fans always has been, what exactly is prog? What does prog rock make prog? And to this day there are discussions whether certain bands really are progressive rock or not. Then there are some prog light bands, for instance, the Alan Parsons Project or Supertramp, that are somehow lumped in with prog. But then there are fans who say that this is not prog, this is just 70s FM pop, whatever.
And then there's also this border between art rock and prog rock,
Yes.
which are two genres that have lots of things in common, but then again, it's not the same. I think art rock is probably more the cool version, the more the stylish version of prog rock, with bands like Roxy Music, or later on Kate Bush, that she's not art rock but has elements of it in her early work.
Yeah.
And so this is very different from like the artists we're going to talk about today, but it's also a bit of it's like with Supertramp is on the very commercial poppy end of prog rock, and on the other side there's those art rock bands. So it's really difficult for me as someone who doesn't know much about
There's so
prog
many
rock.
also subgenres, maybe also. Where does psychedelic rock end and progressive rock begin?
Or hard rock, like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin. Isn't really prog rock, but it's also proggy in some songs.
And in the trio of albums today, there's also one band where we probably can discuss whether this is prog or some other genre. So to get into it, the 3 albums that we picked will be or are In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, then Meddle by Pink Floyd, and finally Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. Prog fans probably will now wonder, where are the big prog names? We've left them out for the time being.
You didn't want to torture me with Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
So depending on what your final verdict will be today, maybe we'll do a part 2, but that's something for the future. So I would suggest we will go through the 3 albums in maybe chronological order, so in the order of their release date.
Yes.
And then just talk a little bit about our impressions, what makes them proggy or not, and how much you hated them. So number 1, and that's the one album I don't have a physical copy of, is In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. It's a classic among prog fans.
Is it from 1970?
It's
69?
It's 1969.
Yeah.
It's often considered one or the first proper prog rock album. It also is one of those albums that usually tops lists, like for instance the Rolling Stones list of the most important or the best prog rock albums. Came out in 1969. It's also the debut album of King Crimson. So did you know, or are you familiar with King Crimson in general as a band, or have you heard of them?
Of course I've heard of them. When I say I don't know much about prog rock, this means I don't know individual albums by most of those artists, but of course I'm familiar. I know where King Crimson, where they come from, where they're going to, and all those things like Robert Fripp. I'm familiar with from Heroes, David Bowie, and so on. So I know a bit about it from those different angles of pop culture that I'm interested in. And of course, I know the historical importance of that album, and that it's considered the first proper prog album by many. But I've never listened to this album before you gave me that homework. From the 3 albums we're talking about today, I was only familiar with Thick as a Brick. This is even my copy, my personal copy. More on that later. But I've never listened to any King Crimson album before, and I've listened to many, to several Pink Floyd albums, but never to Meddle.
Okay.
So this is 2 albums I know since 1 week now.
Great. My first experience with King Crimson must have been during the last years in school. It's probably also a bit of cliche. A lot of male teenagers get into prog rock when they are in their teens.
It's very male music.
It's very male music usually. Male nerds. And I never owned a physical copy of this. Some school friend had, I think, a CD of In the Court of the Crimson King. And so I was familiar with this album, but I haven't really listened to it in a long time. So I also had to re-familiarize myself with this album. So they are a band that changed lineups a lot and also went through different musical.
That's also a typical
styles
prog
and
thing.
phases, yeah.
Typical prog thing that members don't get along with each other.
I guess so, yeah.
The egos are very big in prog bands, I think.
Apparently, prog bands are very good for drama and male divas, and also Robert Fripp, I think, is not the easiest person maybe to get along with. I'm not sure. I only know
Ian Anderson, Roger Waters, you know, all those people have this in common.
And we haven't even started to talk about the band Yes. But
yeah.
Right.
I don't know much music from Yes, but I know that they always, you know, each album there's 3 other members, and then the next album 2 come back, and then the 3 others, and so there's like 10 different versions of Yes, I think.
Yeah, if you're into soap operas and you like music, you can choose ABBA or Fleetwood Mac, but I think Yes even tops them in terms of
and there's not even women in the
Yes,
so.
Okay, but yeah, if you listen to King Crimson, one album will be or can be completely different from another one, and so they started with this one. Iconic artwork as well. I like the artwork quite a lot. I've heard that the guy who painted the artwork died shortly afterwards. So it's the only artwork he ever did for an album, which is a shame. And yeah, with a title like In the Court of the Crimson King, we already have these connotations of maybe fantasy or some fairy tale, medieval. Also, the lyrics, I think, tick a lot of the boxes from Pete Sinfield. But what about the music? There are only 5 tracks on this album. All of them are, most of them are quite long, especially for 1969. So yeah, the album was new for you. Yes. What was your experience?
Thank God there's only 5 tracks on that album. You know, I really didn't like it. But the biggest shock was the first song, because I was familiar with the song title. I guess it's the most famous song of King Crimson. Everyone knows the title, the Schizoid.
21st century Schizoid Man.
Maybe I've heard it years ago because it's so famous and forgotten it, but now I really had to listen to it consciously. You know? And I hated it, you know. They start off with the most famous song, which is also to me the worst song on the album. You know, it gets better after that song. The song, you know, is a bit like it's like the cover artwork to me. It's I know you like the cover artwork, and you know, as a piece of art, I can see that it's a good painting and so on. But you know, it's really the music and the artwork. It's both to me about pain, and it's very claustrophobic, and it's ugly. And the artwork, you know, what it wants to depict is an ugly face. I don't know what's the meaning behind it. And the song, it's really ugly. It's the adjective that I came up with.
But then I would say mission accomplished, because I believe that was also a little bit the attempt or the...
I guess so, because those are competent musicians.
So to confront people with something that doesn't sound too...
They succeeded.
Beautiful.
They succeeded. It's really not very beautiful. And I'm really into beautiful music, especially when we're talking about the late 60s and flower power and weird folk, you know, it's really much about celebration of beauty.
Yeah.
And that's to me that's what I'm here for when I'm listening to late 60s music. And this is, I can see why this was a very important, you know, like a important milestone, a moment in time where things changed, a sea change in pop music and pop culture. So I can see, because of its ugliness, that this is an important song, because it really paved the way for, you know, for all that terrible music of the 70s. But you know, that's something I respect. But it's really not that we're still just talking about the first song. It will get better from there on for me. But you know, that was really a shocker, because I was aware that this is the big song, and I thought, maybe at least this song, maybe I like it. And then, it's terrible, it's terrible. and I had fear. I was afraid that the next 4 tracks it will
Go on like that.
If it would have gone on like that, it would really be music that gives me headache. I would say. But fortunately, that the next couple of tracks, some of them are really tame and and have beauty and
Yes.
are more like anthems or like almost hymns in the church or something like that, or at the court of a king or something like that. So that's more that Lord of the Rings fantasy aspect that I hoped when I listened to prog rock, and I kind of enjoyed the. I'm not sure if I enjoyed all the other 4 tracks, but at least 3. There's one. What's the third track called? Oh no, the second. What's the second track?
The second one is I Talk to the Wind.
Yeah, I think that's a nice ballad almost, but also a bit pointless. And that's my main criticism about prog rock in general is often it goes nowhere. It's a nice mood, but then it goes on for 10 minutes. And I need a chorus, I need a riff, I need something, and it's
We're drinking coffee, by the way, and for some of the tracks on this album, you really need coffee to get through them. I like 21st Century Schizoid Man.
What's it about? What's the song about?
It's heavy riff. That's a good question. I think it's a bleak outlook on the future, and maybe this also reflects the times.
I prefer 20th Century Boy by T-Rex. That's my outlook.
Maybe that also reflects the times of this record, the late 60s, where we always associate them with the flower power, but the hippie movement actually was going out the door, and there was, I think, also in pop culture, rather a feeling of a very bleak outlook to the future.
The 70s, the ugly 70s.
The Vietnam War is reflected in some of those songs. I have more of a problem. I like the ugly riff and the aggressive sound. I have more of a problem with the second half of the song, where it then turns into this jazz rock.
It gets worse and worse. It starts worse and it starts bad and it gets worse.
I Talk to the Wind also is my favorite song.
Yeah, it's my favorite
on the album.
Yeah,
it's maybe the most straightforward. It's very beautiful.
It's the most Pink Floydian song.
Yeah. You have Greg Lake on vocals, who later on, of course, became
Emerson,
part
Lake,
of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And Ian MacDonald, the flute player, also wrote some of the songs. And I think I Talk to the Wind is I hope I'm not mistaken, but I think it's a cooperation between Greg Lake and Ian MacDonald. It's a very beautiful song, but maybe also the least proggy on this album. I don't know.
Yeah. I'd say so.
And then there are In the Court of the Crimson King is an album that I have a lot of respect for, but I don't really enjoy it.
I can totally understand.
Yes.
Even I respect it, like I said, because I see it as an important album for better or worse in my case. But it's the opposite of an album I could fall in love.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to the hateful comments under this video, but to be honest, I don't understand why this album often is considered to be the best prog album.
Maybe because it's
ever.
the first, or it's called the first at least, and this is always something that, if you're first, you get away with things.
Yeah.
That's often that.
There's a lot of potential in this album. Epitaph, the third track, also, for instance, it's solid, but there's no reason why this should be over 8 minutes long. Moonchild, also the first half, really beautiful. It was sort of covered by Doves, one of my favorite post-Britpop bands.
Yeah.
And then it turns into
Doves were the
free jazz, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes of free jazz noise experimentation.
Doves were often called the Pink Floyd of Britpop.
Yeah. So, overall, would you say this is a prog rock album? And if so, what makes it prog to you?
Yes, I would say to me it qualifies. I'm here. You're the more expert than me. I'm totally the opposite of an expert, but I feel like this is what I would call a prog rock album.
Yeah.
And it's a confirmation of what I don't like about prog rock. Like you said, there's lots of noodling also. That the two of the worst aspects to me about prog rock are the like jazz people, jazz noodling, and the other thing is that the boring 10 minutes, the same 3 chords. So two opposite things that I both don't like, and both associates with, that indulgent, that self-indulgent prog rock. Yeah. And of course the themes, as far as I could, understand the lyrics, this magical fantasy theme as well. I would say it's prog rock. Yeah.
Especially on the last track, the title track.
Yeah.
Which has subsections called, I think, The Return of the Fire Witch.
Yeah.
And
the titles are cool. I like those titles.
So there you really have all those elements. And as you mentioned, you get both the self-indulgent experimentation, or as I would call it also sometimes noodling, the solos that go on. And at the same time, sometimes this treading water. But I think it doesn't often come together very well on this album. It has all the elements that I actually like about prog rock, but in an embryonic form. I would even go so far as to call this album rather a kind of psychedelic jazz rock album. It definitely goes into the direction of prog rock, but
yeah, it's like a transgressional album.
Some elements that I enjoy about prog rock, those elegant transitions, the lengthy tracks that have interesting transitions from one part to the next are not really fully in form here. And also the classical elements that I understand that a lot of people hate that about progressive rock, because it's rock music that tries to emulate classical music. I think if it's well done, I really like it. That's missing here. This is more this comes more from a psychedelic jazz. Yeah. So now that we've almost slacked off the most important progressive rock album in history, let's move on to Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Meddle. This was their 5th album, I think, or 6th studio
I bet they
album.
got Gates of Dawn, also full of secrets.
Amalgama,
Atom, Heart,
Mother, and then you have the More soundtrack, I think, in between.
Okay, so and when was Abstracted?
Obscured by Clouds came after.
Okay,
came after this
then
one.
it's the 5th or 6th album.
Yeah, 5th or 6th album. Also iconic cover artwork by, I think, the Hypnosis.
We just saw your cupboard, it was just a reflection.
Yeah.
I think you have the booklet.
I get out the booklet.
Now,
a lot of people always are wondering what this is.
Yeah, me too. What is this?
It is an ear. An ear underwater.
Okay.
If you hold it up like that, you can actually see it. And that was the idea of the band. They wanted to have an ear underwater.
It's part of the egocentrical Roger Waters to have something with water.
Maybe, though. Arguably, this is one of the most collaborative Pink Floyd albums
it
ever.
Sounds like
or
that.
Maybe the last really collaborative album.
Definitely sounds like that.
Also, only 6 tracks this time. Side A had 5 tracks, which are more individual tracks, and then we have Echoes, which in the vinyl version, of course, took up all of side B. Yeah. Prog rock or not?
It's Pink Floyd in general, I would say, is a, like you said in the introduction, there are subgenres of prog rock, and I would say Pink Floyd is one of those. It's not really prog, it's not Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah.
It's its own thing, but it's proggy. But it's more the dream, what nowadays we would call post rock or dream wave, dream rock. It's more the dreamy aspects, the one could say lethargic aspects of prog. But it's definitely not the wild schizoid jazz rock, 10 solos in one song and strange drum breaks. This is more 3 chords all the time and smoking lots of grass and maybe even taking acid or something like that, and then seeing things like that.
Seeing ears underwater.
So it's a proggy thing, but it's not really prog rock, I would say, as they're not expert here.
Floating through space. Also, that's why a lot of fans also refer to Pink Floyd as space rock.
Space rock.
Never really understood also
it makes sense.
where the genre, where the limits are or where the boundaries are between space rock and psychedelic rock. And of course, Pink Floyd came from psychedelic rock. The first time I heard Pink Floyd was actually also a record from my dad, but he had the Relics compilation on vinyl, which of course is very early Pink Floyd, this more psychedelic experimental Pink Floyd. As a kid, I always was a bit scared of this album, but I returned to it because it fascinated me. An album which also includes Interstellar Overdrive, which as a child I didn't understand how you... it's 6 minutes or maybe 10 minutes of complete chaos. But I also was fascinated by it. This is not as chaotic, but I would also say this is an important step towards progressive rock as we know it.
And towards Dark Side of the Moon.
Definitely. The first 5 songs are more or less, dreamy rock, almost a bit folky rock music. But I think what makes this beloved album among prog fans definitely is Echoes. Also one of the longest Pink Floyd songs ever. I think the second longest track they ever put on record. One of these days maybe also has a proggy tendency. So overall, I guess you had a better experience with this one than with In the Court of the Criminal.
Not really. I really didn't like it. I know several Pink Floyd albums. I love Piper at the Gates of Dawn. It's my favorite Pink Floyd album actually. And in general, I love the Syd Barrett Pink Floyd. I also I really like Syd Barrett's first solo album, kind of like his second solo album as well. I also like Saucer Full of Secrets, and my second favorite Pink Floyd album is Atom Heart Mother, which is already without Sid, but it's still, those albums I've talked about now, they're not prog albums to me, they're psychedelic albums, or in the Sid solo albums, psychedelic folk albums, and that's a style of music I really like, but I think after Sid left, I know I'm wrong here because they sold hundreds of millions of albums from after he left and sold much less albums when he was in the band. But in my personal, as a music fan, I think they lost their direction after Sid left the band, and they could sustain, a bit longer what he brought to the group with Atom Heart Mother, which I think was still in the spirit of Sid was in this album. But Meddle and the albums between, they're obscured by Clouds and Amalgama, I never listened to those albums. So this is the next album chronologically that I know, and then after that I know Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here on the Wall. I hate all those albums. Never listened to Animals. Maybe I would like Animals because people say that I probably would enjoy Animals more than The Wall, for example, but I never listened to it because I hate Pink Floyd. But I don't even like Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, or especially The Wall. So I'm really a Pink Floyd hater. I once made a video, bands that are big and respected that I can't stand, and Pink Floyd was, I think, the number 1 band in this. It wasn't really a ranking, but it's really a band that I never could get into after Sid Barrett. So this album, to me, coming from, Atom Heart Mother being the last chronologically album that I listened to, this is to me the start of the end. From here on it gets bombastic and bloated and in my opinion, I know many people will have a different opinion here, but they blow up something that has so little substance. They make such a big sweeping thing out of nothing, and I think that's the Roger Waters thing. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, and he has ideas that he thinks are very intellectual, very philosophical, and they are maybe to a certain extent, but he blows, really small statements up to like he's Moses and he has the Ten Commandments in his hands. It's too much, and the music here, it's not that bombastic as Dark Side and later on. It's not stadium rock yet. Those later albums are really going into prog rock, stadium rock. Two things I hate. This is still like a little eccentric album.
Yes.
Which I should like, but the songs, to me they're going nowhere. I think it's what's the point of this music? I can understand, when you want to, when you're like I said, on acid or smoking weed. I can understand that it's maybe suited for those kind of experiences, but just to listen to it so on its own, it doesn't bring me any joy. I think the only thing that I like about it, and the only member on this album that I like is the keyboarder, Rick Wright. Is this his name?
Yeah.
I think he does the most interesting things on this album. So I understand what you said when you said this is probably the most collaborative album, because it's not yet, to me, those big Gilmore, Waters egos. It's those three people plus the drummer also plays, I suppose, nicely. So it's four people that are really that have a vibe together, and that at this time they seem like they enjoy being in a band with each other. But the music that comes out of it, I don't really enjoy. I think it's not fun. It's not enough fun for me. Music has to be fun for me in the first place.
So you mentioned stadium rock. This certainly isn't stadium rock. Maybe one of these days has a bit more of a drive to it.
This isn't yet stadium rock.
We
the next
have
album.
Actually a crowd singing on Fearless. You get the Liverpool fans singing "You Never Walk Alone."
Ah, okay. I've overheard that.
There's a snippet used for that. But of course, at this point, Pink Floyd were still kind of an underground band. And I find this phase in their band history quite charming, because, as you, I think, mentioned yourself, they were still trying to find their way after Syd Barrett left. Also, this is more collaborative. Indeed, I think A Pillow of Winds is David Gilmour. Fearless is written by David Gilmour. Echoes really was a complete band effort, so this is not the Roger Waters show yet, and this album hasn't got a concept. It actually feels maybe a bit thrown together. They had just some ideas and made up this album, which I quite enjoy. It's got its flaws, but
it's good that it's not a concept album. That
solo Roger Waters song, I think, is the fluffiest one here, Saint-Tropez, which is kind of a almost filler.
I like Saint-Tropez, the place, the town, but I didn't like. I thought before I listened, I was familiar. I knew that Pink Floyd had a song called Saint-Tropez. Never listened to it before, but I thought, oh, okay, at least they're singing. They're playing about a place that I like, and there must be something for me in it. But this song, when I listen to it, it doesn't have any Saint-Tropez vibes to me. It's not what I connect with Saint-Tropez. I mean, there's they attempt to some French things in the song, but it's not really. I don't see the inspiration of Saint-Tropez in this song.
What this album certainly for me is about, and what Pink Floyd probably always were about, is more the sound. What they do with sound and sound effects. I think it still sounds great. Personally, I like Echoes, even though it is just a long trip. And the one place where they used humor usually is hated by Pink Floyd fans. Probably says a lot more about Pink Floyd fans. It's Seamus, where they have the dog howling to make fun of blues a little bit. I think it's just quite charming track. Overall, I would say this is 50% prog rock. Echoes definitely is progressive rock, with all the different movements and the different parts. But the other songs, kind
space
experimental folk rock band.
What I have to say also about that album is this was one of the only times when I listened to an album on Spotify. I usually don't like to listen to albums on Spotify, but since these are albums that I really, I don't feel the need to buy them as a not prog rock fan, so I listen to those, to King Crimson and this album on Spotify. And for the first time, I was kind of relieved or glad when those ads came blaring in, because I have the Spotify for free, because I don't like Spotify, so I don't want to give them money.
Get a bit of a break.
Get a bit of. Usually those are so those ads are so terrible. They're like torture,
and they're always a bit louder than the actual music.
It's really like they want to torture you so that you buy the subscription model. But for the first time I was like, oh, I'm really relieved that now it's time for an ad. So
you really probably wished for an ad in the middle of Echoes, but it didn't come.
Yeah, it didn't come. No.
Right, so that's basically 2 misses. So we have just one more left, which is probably the most pretentious thing you can do in prog rock. It was intended as the mother of all prog rock albums, and at the same time make fun of prog rock. Simply one track. Put one track on one album. Figures of Brick Part 1 and Part 2. Came out in 1972 by a band that also usually is considered prog rock, but also not. It's a bit of on the outskirts of progressive rock.
I would say they're the outlaws of
the outlaws of prog rock, or they, for a while they were a prog rock band, and then they simply stopped being prog rock in the 80s.
And did what they just wanted to do. Or Ian Anderson did what they
yes. Wanted to do. And we have another complicated frontman or authoritative frontman here. So I know that you've listened to a bit of Jethro Tull and that you enjoyed it, but I had a bit of a feeling that this one could be maybe a bit more difficult for you, because basically it's just one track that goes from one part to the next, so everything that you probably hate about prog rock.
I love this album. It's a masterpiece to me. It's not my favorite Jethro Tull album. My favorite Jethro Tull album is Songs from the Wood.
Yeah.
Which is the more folky,
pastoral
album.
Folk,
my second favorite album goes a bit more into a proggy. It's a bit more proggy than Songs from the Wood. It's Minstrel in the Gallery. And
which is also my number 2.
And it's a fantastic album. But this Aqualung and maybe Heavy Horses, those are like my number 3, 4, 5. I don't know which is 3, 4, 5. And I would consider all those of my top 5 favorite Jethro Tull albums. I'm hesitant to say masterpieces, because Songs from the Wood definitely is a masterpiece to me, and but I would say Figures of Brick is a masterpiece. It's like a 10 out of 10 album for me. A soft 10 out of 10, 10 minus. This is all I love about music, and I don't care if it's labeled prog rock or whatever. This is a brilliant artistic expression, I would say, and the most brilliant thing about the way this artistic expression was done is that it's with tongue in cheek.
Extremely.
With lots of weird British sense of humor, but also takes itself serious, because it's not like a Monty Python sketch. It can also be taken serious, because it's the playing, the performances of all the musicians are brilliant. Here something happens on the Pink Floyd album. Nothing did happen for me, and on the the King Crimson album, too much. At least in the first track was happening. It was like jazz to me. Often it's like it's just too much to let it all in. But this is really, it has like the way it progresses. So it's a prog album because it progresses. The way the tracks progress, it really has like a structure, and it gets loud, and then it gets quiet, it gets wild, and it gets soft. It has the flute, it has the folky acoustic stuff, it has wild, exciting hard rock. All the other albums, or the 2 other albums, they don't really have something that's very important to rock music, which is like the sex, the edginess, the danger aspect. this is not, this isn't like Exile on Main Street. It's still a very nerdy album, but it's, when it rocks, it rocks. And it's a cool album, and I like everything about it. And as a prog hater, of course, I love it that the concept of the album is to make fun of concept prog rock albums. So, and a brilliant cover.
Employing
best cover of the 3 albums.
Great musical skill. I think also, but yeah, then there are drum solos in here, so everything that
but if it's tasteful, if it's done right, if it's not, if it has some meaning, if it elevates the song, I know fans of the other 2 albums will say, yeah, what do you mean? The other albums have lots of meaning, but to me, the other 2 albums don't have. When there's a drum solo on the King Crimson album, it doesn't speak to me. But here, I think everything is in the right place, and I think Ian Anderson is a genius. If he had made only this album, I still would consider him a genius.
Yeah.
But he has like I said, 5 albums that are like as much or even more than this. So he's a super genius. And like I said, I don't care if he's prog rock, and I think he himself doesn't care about these labels.
I don't think so either.
But I don't care what genre he's associated with. I think he's a magician. I can't even say the word because it's so. I'm in awe of him. He's a wizard. He's a wizard. Yeah. It's an easier word.
So
magician.
Famously, this was his response to critics who, after Aqualung came out, always said, Jethro Tull have done a concept album with Aqualung. He always denied that. Personally, I would say Aqualung is at least a thematic album. There are certain themes.
That's also his tongue-in-cheek thing that he plays games with journalists, and that is also always a contrarian, and that's also something that's in his lyrics and his music. And I like people that are like that. I'm a big John Lennon fan. I like people who always are against what you say.
So this was his reaction and his idea of, okay, if they consider us progressive rock, then we give them progressive rock, which is 40 minutes of just one track. And if you get bored during listening, you can at least still read the newspaper.
Fantastic.
The lavish cover artwork is still fascinating to these days. It was really an entire newspaper with very silly newspaper articles. You get a lot of Monty Python spirit in the whole thing, but as you said, the music still takes itself seriously. It's not silly music. It's actually
it's music. It makes fun of a certain music, but still respects and loves that music that it makes fun of. That's always with comedy. I think the important thing to make it high class comedy.
It's a loving send-up, and to me this is definitely progressive rock because it's not only lengthy, it goes through different kinds of parts. The music, the playing is very high level, maybe even more complicated than it needs to be, but it just sounds good. And still,
the production also is
the
brilliant.
sound for 1972, there's a really crisp sound. The drums, the acoustic guitar sounds magnificent on this album. Absolutely. I don't know why, but I've always been a fan of Anderson's acoustic guitar playing.
Do you know who the producer was of that album? Must be genius.
Not by heart. I need to look it up. Robin Black, maybe.
But it's a great production.
It's fantastic. And I was surprised that you like this one best, but at the same time, this actually underlines my theory that this album is a wonderful album for starters.
Yeah.
Because yes, it is basically just one long track, but it consists of actually different songs.
Yeah. I know that it's supposed to be just one song, but when I'm listening to it, I don't have the feeling it's one song.
It has the different sections, and
it takes me to so many places.
They are actually like a suite of songs that are somehow put together by instrumental transitions. And I've also read somewhere that the secret formula of this album is to create complexity through layers of simplicity. Actually, probably as a musician, if you listen to the single, what all the single instruments do, it's not super complicated, but the way it's put together, it becomes this huge
Yeah, and that's
huge
also
thing.
something I like about it, that it's not like musicians, showing off like, oh, look what I can do. And if the song sometimes the song doesn't need you to play a 20-minute drum solo, and this album knows that.
Yeah.
It's you can hear those are very, very competent, if not exceptional musicians, but they don't show off, if something simple suits the track, they play it simple, but you can almost always feel that they could make weird shit with that stuff.
And if they do, it's always very tongue-in-cheek. I mentioned the drum solo, which is actually a bit bizarre. It's very much at the start of the second part.
The most bizarre drum solo, except the end by Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr solo is a bit more bizarre.
There's the very end, there's a short string section. They just throw it in there because it's nicely pompous.
That's great.
And of course, the concept of this album also was really silly. Allegedly, the lyrics had been written by this young...
Didn't know that, but
this young boy in a poetry competition. So also the credits on the album say lyrics by Gerald Bostock, who of course did not exist. And the story also, it also says here in the main article on the front cover, that the boy then was disqualified from the contest because his poetry was against God and country.
The poor boy, is it something like with the Nevermind boy? The Nevermind boy sued Nirvana 20 years later because of child pornography or something. This boy also must have been like traumatized for life, that he's that guy.
This priceless, this photo, his face, his haircut, also his I think au pair.
But he looks like Ian Anderson as a child would look with that coat. Maybe, and he looks like a Jethro Tull fan. Like a young Jethro Tull fan.
And then you have this girl with the super short skirt in the background. So it's absolutely tongue-in-cheek, the entire thing.
And this lady is the most hilarious thing, I think. I think she's so a photobomb.
Granny with gin and tonic, maybe. Yeah. So that was our little first venture into prog rock, or
maybe the last.
Maybe prog rock. Maybe your last. I will continue to listen to at least 2 of these 3 albums frequently.
Next time I want to listen to Tarkus or something by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, because I always hear this is for prog haters the worst of prog rock, and I really want to test the waters. I really want to see how deep, how low it can go. If we
continue with this, I would definitely.
I want to be shocked.
Go to the really heavy hitters.
I want to be challenged.
Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Genesis.
I hate yes.
So maybe look forward to this part 2. I have a different Emerson, Lake and Palmer album in mind for you, which is
Love on the Beach, or what's it called?
Love Beach.
Love Beach. The cover is great. They look like the Bee Gees on the cover.
That was their contractual obligation album.
And they couldn't stand each other during the photo shoot. It was very tense. I heard the stories. That's interesting.
But that's
to me.
Stories
like that are interesting to me.
I haven't listened to it in full.
I want to listen to it.
ELP fans hate it.
I want to listen. I want to listen to it. This will be the next.
So, thanks for taking your time. Thanks for...
I loved one of the 3 albums.
Confronting your ears with this terrible prog or proto-prog. Thanks for watching.
You haven't asked the question, is this prog?
Oh yeah,
have you answered
prog?
this? I think this is prog.
To me, this is 100% prog.
Yeah, this is 100% prog.
Yeah.
More than the others. Yeah. So I'm not really, one could go away from this video and say, well, he really hates prog because he hated Meddle and I even forgot the first. But I love the album that I think is the most prog album of the 3.
Yes.
So I'm a prog really fan. They are not prog enough for me. I love this album because I don't think the other albums are prog enough for me. So I'm the ultra prog fan.
Yeah. Robert Fripp is going to block this video now after
and Sea of Tranquility.
Really bad comments.
We get the thumb down by Sea of Tranquility. Yeah. And Rick Beato will also hate it.
If you want to listen to cool King Crimson, maybe go for the albums Red or Discipline. I still think you wouldn't like them, to be honest, but those are the King Crimson albums.
No, enough King Crimson for me. Enough King Crimson.
Okay, maybe more in part 2. Thanks for watching if you made it to the end. And that's it from us, from the couch of PROG.
Thank you.